To the Point with Michael Williams.
King tides in South Florida, we're seeing them of late again, can be a big annoyance. Will rising sea levels make it like this and potentially far worse every day in parts of our area? Good morning and welcome. More and more we're seeing the impact of rising sea levels. Climate scientists say it may get a lot worse, and predictions are it will be impacting a great many more people in the years and decades to come, in your lifetime and certainly in the lifetime of your children and grandchildren. I'm working on a story about all of this for next week, but here's a bit of a preview of that story right now. Do not bet against nature on sea level rise. What's the worst look like?
It looks bad.
Dr. John Renne is an urban planner at Florida Atlantic University.
I will choose not to ignore it, and I chose to buy a house that's 15 feet above sea level.
This is Palm Beach today. And this is what sea level rise models predict it might look like around Royal Palm Way near the famed Worth Avenue in just 40 short years.
And it tells us that that's 14 inches of water during the high tide in 2060.
Now jump ahead, same spot in 2080.
And now in that same spot, we have 33 inches of water.
Now imagine that, 33 inches of water, 2080, in a place where thousands of people and many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property sits. And that's just in one area. You can see my full report this Tuesday at 6 p.m. And we're not just talking on barrier islands. We're talking mainland impacts too. Again, my report Tuesday, 6 o'clock, WPTV News Channel 5. Joining me now, the expert you saw in the story, Dr. John Renne, the director of the Center for Urban and Environmental Solutions at Florida Atlantic University. And Doctor, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
We'll look broad view, but give us a sense. How bad could sea level rise be? How bad could the impact be for us as we look at worst case models?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming. The water is coming, and it will be bad. It's a matter of time. We're not talking about something that's going to happen necessarily in a few years, but within our lifetimes and within our kids' lifetimes, we will see significant impacts.
You had said to me when we were talking at the university, think about, first of all, the lifetime of your children. We can all relate to that. Think about getting a 30-year mortgage right now, or in the life of two 30-year mortgages. This is not something that's, way down there. This is something we have to think about now.
It is. You know, as a planner, we have a saying, you know, that you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And so what we're trying to do at FAU is to develop tools that politicians, planners, and the community can have access to be able to make better long-term decisions.
And you talked about, in the report, and you'll see this on Tuesday night, we talked to places like Jupiter. People tend to think sea level rise right at the coastline. You may have noticed in the maps that right at the beachfront, even in your modeling 40, 60 years from now, there wasn't necessarily the sea level rise inundating that. It sits at a higher level. It was more on the intracoastal side of the one map we showed. But those maps, we looked up and down the coastline. We looked into the Treasure Coast. We looked at places like Jupiter. We're talking significant potential impacts. You're taking data from climate planners and saying, if the data is correct, this is what we could expect. Whether it turns out to be correct, how we maybe mitigate against the impacts, that's a different topic.
Correct. And what we're starting to hear from the climate scientists is that what we thought was going to happen maybe by the year 2100 may even happen much sooner, maybe by the year 2050. I mean, some of the severe impacts that we're looking at could be 30 years, 40 years away from now.
They think their modeling may not be as aggressive as it needs to be in terms of the potential worst case impact.
Yeah, because a lot of the data that we're using have been developed about, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and some of the newer models looking at some of the destabilization of the ice sheets in Antarctica, if those come to fruition, the impacts that we see for the year 2100 may actually happen by the year 2050.
You're talking, again, you were talking 14 inches of sea level rise, then I think, what were we talking, another about 20 some odd by 2080 or more on that piece of Palm Beach County. But up and down the Palm Beaches and Treasure Coast, we would see a variety of impacts. A lot of you sitting watching this say this, the problem seems too big, so what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to do about it? Both as residents, as business owners, developers, and political thought leaders. Not that I'm asking to wear all their hats, but how do we take that and do something about it or do something with it?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that we still have time. We've got time to prepare. We've got time to put a plan in place and to figure out which areas we can protect and which areas eventually we may not be able to protect.
But that means we're going to have to make some tough decisions in 40, 50 years. Can we build enough seawalls? Can we do enough mitigation with pumping, with building roads higher, with reinforcing and raising the height of homes or businesses? Can we do all that? Will that be enough? And A, what's the cost? And B, if it's not enough, what do we do then?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from an economic standpoint, if areas are going to be flooded because of rising sea levels, those areas will no longer have an economic value to them, and they won't be generating property taxes, for example. So it may make sense, over the next 10, 20, 30 years to be able to make an investment to protect those areas, so that way the economic value will remain.
We look at king tides and the kind of headaches that can create on any particular day. Imagine something like this, but perhaps even far worse, every day at high tide. The question ultimately will become, for some segments of Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast, both on the barrier islands and some portions of the mainland, can we afford to mitigate against it? And if we can't, ultimately you're looking at issues about relocation in the decades to come, about where we live, how we live, what we can protect against and what we can't.
Correct. And the news for Palm Beach County is a lot better than it is for Broward County.
And the Treasure Coast is better news as well?
Yeah, the Treasure Coast, Palm Beach County is in a much better position than Broward and Miami-Dade County and Monroe counties. They sit
lower. We sit on a bigger, higher limestone ridge here.
Correct. Yeah, we're on average high enough that we can withstand, by and large, a 3-foot sea level rise. Now, there's going to be significant impacts to Palm Beach County and the Treasure Coast. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of work that needs to be done to mitigate those impacts, but if that does happen, we're going to see a northern migration of folks from Miami and Fort Lauderdale up into our area, because those areas are going to be uninhabitable.
That's a big word. When people say uninhabitable, I've seen the maps. We'll show some of those to you in some of our web presentation this week. How bad will it be, or could it potentially be? We saw some of the impacts on a little sliver of our community, Miami-Dade and Broward. Same time frame, 2060, 2080, 2100, well within the lifetime of your children and grandchildren.
Yeah, I mean, the impacts that's coming to Miami and Fort Lauderdale are on orders of magnitude way greater than what we're seeing in Palm Beach and the Treasure Coast. Don't get me wrong, we have significant impacts that are coming here. And there are ways in Miami and Fort Lauderdale that they can protect certain portions and certain neighborhoods, but they just have much larger populations that live in areas that with a 3-foot sea level rise may not be able to be protected.
And again, we stress this is based on what climate scientists say is possible with what they're seeing with ice sheets, with current sea level rise. You are not a climate scientist. Your job is to take their data and say, if it bears out,
correct,
this is what you could expect to see. And at FAU, you sit with policy planners and thought leaders and say, here are the type of things you need to be thinking about.
Correct. I mean, the saying is you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And so if the scientists are telling us that we need to plan for a 2 or 3 foot sea level rise within the next 80 years, we now take the tools and we put that together and we visualize what that could look like and what are some of the engineering and economic and policy solutions to be able to implement a plan.
No pun intended. I could imagine people sitting at home, though, saying that this problem simply is too big. It's going to swamp us because of the enormity of it. I've seen the maps with you, Miami-Dade and Broward. If they bear out, you would have to see a massive relocation of people. You're talking billions of dollars worth of property, tens of thousands of people. You and I have talked. It's daunting to try and wrap your head and your arms around it.
It is daunting, and it may end up being one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. But if you look back, at the last 100 years, and you look at what, America has been able to do in terms of rising up, World War I, World War II. I mean, we were posed with significant challenges, and we rose to that occasion. And sea level rise along coastal America, across the whole continent, could take on an order of importance of like a World War I or World War II, where we have to mobilize.
In terms of the relocation aspect of that, in terms of the economic dislocation, obviously.
Yeah.
And you said this, and I want to be careful because I know the way you meant it. Obviously, World War I, II, we're not comparing to that loss of life and the horrors of that, but in terms of the economic impact of relocation, simply in that aspect, that type, that's what you mean by that.
Well, correct. And the point is how do we mobilize our society to face a threat? And as that threat, we need to come up with policy that responds to the threat.
So we try and mitigate against it as best we can. Sea level rise means sea walls, pumping stations, but we also have a porous rock that we sit on. So it's not a matter of just building a wall high enough. That water comes through and up, and it can do that well inland. The question a lot of people might say, I live either along the mainland near the intracoastal, or maybe farther inland, or I live on the intracoastal. I could see people's eyes getting wide now saying, what do I do? It's not a tomorrow problem, but we can't stick our head in the sand. We're going to start seeing impacts on whether people will insure you to live there in the next 20, 30, 40 years, those type of things, and we have to think about it. I guess if there's one overarching message, we can no longer just say, it's not going to happen, I'll stick my head in the sand.
No, and we're going to start to see the economic impacts of this long before we see the flooding impacts. And what's going to happen is insurance companies are already looking at this issue, and at some point they may choose to no longer write policies in these particular locations. And so when that starts to happen, you know, people may not be able to sell their homes because people may not be able to get a mortgage.
And Dr. Renne, if there's one overarching message, and this is a theme in our Protecting Paradise series that I'm going to continue to pick up on. There's so much here. I'm going to get political thought leaders in here and talk to other people who plan for infrastructure. So this is just the opening bit of what I hope to continue as a whole new vein of storytelling. But from your point of view as an urban planner, what's the overarching message for the homeowner, the property owner, the community, and thought leaders of what you hope to achieve by what you're showing us?
Well, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create tools and put those tools into the hands of the community to be able to see, you know, is their house in an impacted area in the future? And if it is, then, you know, I would imagine a homeowner who owns property in a place that may flood in 20 or 30 or 40 years, they may want to then go to their local elected official and say, what are you doing about this? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, our tools can help neighborhoods. They can help the leaders of a community be able to say, okay, we know we have problems coming, and we could identify where those problems are going to be. And then we could take actions with engineers and architects and urban planners and others to say, okay, what are the solutions? How much do they cost? And do we want to make this investment or not?
But we need to start planning and thinking. Ignoring it is not an option.
Ignoring it is never a good option.
And certainly here. And again, we're going to show you a way that you can go into these interactive maps and see for yourself what it might look like in the very area you live 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So that interactive tool will be at your disposal. I'm also going to do a Facebook Live. We'll talk about this much more. Hope to have you with us for that as well. We appreciate you coming in. And again, my special report on sea level rise Tuesday at 6 p.m. here on News Channel 5. Coming up next, could be another big week for Democrats running for president. Our roundtable next. Democrats get set to debate again as the impeachment hearing is underway. Our roundtable taking up that and more when we come back. Now for our roundtable with Mariana Mancuso, Republican political strategist, and News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley, a new Democrat now in the presidential race. Former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick filed his papers to be in the New Hampshire primary. Also, Hillary Clinton says many people are urging her to run for president. We've heard about that potential boomlet all year. Will it be so? And the Democrats not happy, at least some, with the candidates they already have in the field. So the question to both of you, they seem to be saying that. That's why Patrick says maybe there's room for me. Michael Bloomberg, the Republican, Democrat, independent, has been across the political spectrum. Maybe there's room for me. What does it say about the field? But let's begin with the name that I know caught attention. Is there really any chance you see of a Hillary Clinton candidacy in 2020?
They say third time's a charm, but I think it's cute. She's trying to stay relevant.
Brian, any chance of a Hillary Clinton candidacy in 2020?
I think she needs to stop talking to her close friends who have been telling her yes since birth, and she needs to talk to real people out there, because I think most Democrats roll their eyes at the idea that Hillary Clinton getting in this race. I don't think she'd find a lot of support.
What about the broader question about people saying they think they see room for themselves? A Bloomberg who's not committed yet, a Patrick because they're not happy, or they think that people aren't happy with the most progressive part of the party, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Bernie Sanders, and feel that they can't win in November of 2020. What does that say at this late day, where we can see with binoculars the caucuses coming up, that they seem to still be uncertain within the party about who can carry the banner?
Well, I mean, look, everybody seems to think that they can win this race. That's why they're running for office, which I think is great. But at some point, I think it borders on delusional. That's not to say that the gentleman joining us from Massachusetts and signing the papers and all of that is going to be, he's not going to make it. I think the reality is they have to figure out where they're going to go. And the voters are having whiplash with everyone joining the stage and trying to vie for that candidacy.
January is around the corner, then on to February, and off we'll go. Brian, your sense of how this begins to filter out?
You know, I think the campaign up until fairly recently was, the whole idea was that Joe Biden was going to be the #1 guy, and then we'd see who might be able to, stay with him and hang in there after they got outside of New Hampshire and South Carolina. Well, sadly for Joe Biden, he really hasn't been the top dog. I mean, he's ahead in some polls and stuff, but people kind of still rolling their eyes at Joe Biden. His performance hasn't been that great. And that's why you have people like Michael Bloomberg and DeBell Patrick, talking about getting into the race now, because they just don't see a strong front runner.
But you have a party that's at war with itself about whether some of its most ardent proponents of policy prescriptions, Medicare for all, like an Elizabeth Warren, who many argues at least a co-front runner, whether that's enough to carry him to victory in November 2020. So it's interesting about how far they feel their policy prescriptions will go before a general electorate, and that seems to be the battle right now.
The politics in this country have been roiling since 2016. If you look at the Republican Party in 2016, which had its posse of candidates, most of whom were traditional Republicans, and they warred among themselves, and this guy Donald Trump shows up and they kind of poo-poo him and go away. Well, we saw the entire structure of the Republican Party fall apart and rebuild itself under the mantle of Donald Trump. I think that in many ways the Democratic Party is going through the same thing. You have the traditional Democrats, you have some new breed Democrats in there, and they're trying to figure out the direction of the party. And when this 2020 election is over, we'll certainly have a better sense of what direction the party's going in.
Is it decidedly progressive, centrist? Where do they go? And speaking to that, in the debate coming up next week, which I have a feeling you two will be watching, what do you look for? A lot of emphasis on Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren kind of took the slings and arrows last time. Bloomberg and Patrick won't be there, but your sense of it when the 10 candidates at least will be on stage, more waiting in the wings.
At least it's getting smaller, right?
Yeah, somewhat.
We're getting a smaller stage, and I'll be looking actually to see how Warren fares with her Medicare for All plan. This will be the first time she's on the debate stage where she's rolled out a policy plan. We'll also be watching Joe Biden to make sure he doesn't fall asleep and he's there and present. But also Kamala Harris, right? She's going to try and kind of wedge herself between Warren and Biden and set herself apart from them, and she'll go after both of them because they are the perceived front runners.
What about Klobuchar from Minnesota, who argued that if that Pete Buttigieg, a mayor from South Bend, is getting more publicity than she is a woman, as a successful senator from Minnesota has gotten. She's trying to find a way to wedge herself into more of a slightly centrist piece of that pie. Buttigieg raising a lot of money, but not a lot of traction. Where do you see those players going? Of course, Bernie Sanders still very viable.
Well, I'm not sure what she as a woman has to do with anything.
Well, she argued that Pete Buttigieg, she said, if I was as a woman, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, you'd have never given me the time of day. Whereas Pete Buttigieg, as the mayor of South Bend, is getting national publicity. She feels there's a little bit of unfairness about where the level of scrutiny is. And there was some implicit claim of sexism there.
Well, for the Democratic Party, in its last 3 nominations, has nominated an African-American, and a woman. So I think that they've kind of proven their point on being the big party that brings everybody in. Pete Buttigieg, God, I wish his last name was easier to pronounce, Mayor Pete, I think he's just worked harder, and he's slowly, but she's done what some candidates do, he's slowly but surely built up his support, and we'll see what happens to him.
Final quick take, it goes on and on, the impeachment inquiry, you've been watching, your thoughts. Does it really move the dial at all on where Republicans sit on this or Democrats thus far?
I would say up to this point, no. I think that most voters who are watching this, they're already set in their views. I think those people in the middle who are watching this may be with an open mind. I don't think much has been done by the Democrats to move the needle yet.
And ultimately, the no-party affiliated voters are the ones, whether they move this way or that will tell the tale of this ultimately.
There's a real opportunity for them, especially in 2020, to be the silent majority, the true silent majority. And when it comes to the impeachment, we've watched Democrats and Republicans continue to beat the drum to try to force Americans to choose their side that is the right side of history. And the reality is right now, we don't know.
Thank you much. Closing comments in just a moment. The Mancuso moment.
Well, I just want to make our viewers aware of something. I got a really unsettling message this week from a former student of mine. She was actually frauded out of over $4,000. The IRS, these people called and posed as the IRS, and they told her that someone had been using her social security number and she had to take money and wire it to them. And they stole all of her money for tuition and missions trips. And so I just want everyone to be aware that that is a thing that's happening, and they're actually targeting seniors.
And never, ever, ever take a call and call back and give your information away, ever. Great advice. The Crowley closer.
You know, one of the things that really struck me with this latest school shooting in California is how many people treated it like an accident on I-95. I was with some folks and I noticed on the TV that the shooting took place, and I said that there's a shooting, and people basically didn't even look up. And that's sad that we've reached that point where now school shootings have become part of our norm.
Between newscasts, we were talking about that last night, how chilling it has become, that exactly what you described, to some extent, for some, has been another day in America.
We need to start looking in the mirror and consider what kind of people we are.
Brian, Mariana, thank you as always, and thank you for being with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send us your comments about the broadcast, go to WPTV.com, click on the To The Point page. You'll see a section to send us your views. As always, thanking my analysts for being with us and wishing you and yours a great day and a great week.